Hey everyone. So when it comes to shifting on our aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, we're going to at least, to begin with, we're going to start at full employment. Eventually, you're going to want to get to a point where you can start with a recessionary gap, start with an inflationary gap, and then maybe go from there. But at least while we're practicing shifting, we're going to want to start from full employment. So to do that, we're going to start by drawing our X and Y axes. So we're going to have price level up here on the y-axis. We're going to have real GDP out there on the x-axis. So I've got my x-axis labeled, my y-axis labeled. And then for the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, at full employment, we're going to start with 3 lines. So it kind of helps to make a big X like we did in Unit 2, but now we have to put a 3rd curve in here. We're going to put our long run aggregate supply curve right there in the center because we're at full employment. And then we're going to label these: long run aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Some professors label this SAS instead of SRAS. On the AP test, you can do either one, SRAS, SAS. Either way is fine. This point right here, we're going to label our full employment. It's always at the long run aggregate supply curve. We're always going to label that full employment. We're going to use Y and then FE for full employment. And then we want to label our current price level. If you're at full employment, you can probably also label it your equilibrium price level. That will work as well. If you're in disequilibrium, if you're at the recessionary gap or inflationary gap, you probably just want to label it PLC for current, right? But this is where we're going to start. And then we're going to shift our curve. So remember our shifters that when it comes to aggregate demand, SIGICs are going to be our shifters. More consumer spending, more aggregate demand. More investment or business spending, more aggregate demand. More government spending, more aggregate demand. More foreign spending, meaning if they're buying more of our stuff or they want more of our stuff, then that's going to increase aggregate demand as well. On the supply side, our shifters are really going to be like resources, technology, and then like government involvement in the economy. So this is different than government spending, but for on the supply side, the more like regulations or red tape that the government creates, the less aggregate supply you're going to get, short run aggregate supply you're going to get. So once we have this, we're going to shift our curve the same way we did in Unit 2. We're going to draw an arrow. So for instance, for number 1 on the worksheet, it says like Calvin, and this comes from Calvin and Hobbes' comic that I used to show in class. Calvin and other kids convince their parents to buy them more big ticket items for Christmas to kind of boost the economy, right? So if Calvin and gets his parents and other parents want to buy more for their kids, if we get more consumer spending, aggregate demand is going to increase. So I draw my arrow, I draw my new curve, I label my new curve, and then I find the intersection point between my short run aggregate supply and my aggregate demand. Right? So whether it's short run aggregate supply shifting or whether it's aggregate demand shifting, you're going to find that new intersection point, and then that becomes your current economy, right? Your long run aggregate supply curve stays there. That's just giving us a basis of comparison. So right now my price level has increased. We can see that on the y-axis. My output has increased. We see that on my x-axis. And if you wanted to describe what you have, you could say that we have an inflationary gap because my output is greater than what is sustainable. But ultimately, price level has gone up, output has gone up. And if you want, you can say what's going to happen to unemployment. Unemployment and output are opposites. So if my output is going up, then my unemployment rate has to go down because in order to produce more stuff, we need more workers. More workers means lower unemployment rate, everything else held constant. So that's how we shift on this graph. This was an example of an aggregate demand shift. If we did a short run aggregate supply shift, it would be the same. We draw our arrow, we shift that curve, we find the new intersection point, we label it, and then we report out what we found. So, all right, there you go. Good luck.